The transit between dimensions was usually a violent, tearing sensation, a brief passage through raw chaos before depositing the Doomslayer into the next arena of his eternal war. He was locked onto the energy signature of a hellwell, another festering wound pouring demonic filth onto a UAC facility. The slipgate flared, reality fractured, and he was hurled forward, but something went wrong. It wasn't the clean tear he was used to. It was a jagged, stuttering rip. Perhaps demonic interference. Perhaps another of Samuel Hayden's calculated betrayals. The destination coordinates blurred, corrupted. He felt a sickening lurch, a sense of being pulled sideways through realities he had never touched. Instead of the familiar, sulfurous stench of hell or the sterile, metallic tang of a UAC base, he felt dampness, cold, and a silence that was profoundly, unnervingly wrong. He didn't arrive. He impacted. He materialized, not in a flash of argent energy, but in a brutal, concussive thump, as if dropped from a great height. He landed hard on cracked, damp asphalt, the impact sending spiderwebs through the road surface. His Praetor suit's systems flared red for a moment, compensating for the unexpected kinetic shock before stabilizing back to green. He rose slowly, his shotgun held ready, his helmet's visor scanning the environment. He was in a street, an empty street, dilapidated buildings, their windows boarded up or staring like vacant eyes, lined both sides. A thick, unnatural fog, gray and cloying, clung to everything, reducing visibility to a mere 20 feet. The air was cold, damp, and carried a faint, metallic scent, like old blood. There was no fire, no screams, no roaring demons, only silence. A heavy, pregnant silence that felt infinitely more menacing than the loudest battle cry of hell. His internal heads-up display flickered. Communications, offline. Argent energy sensor, 0 reading. Demonic presence indicator. Fluctuating wildly, nonsensically, detecting faint traces everywhere and nowhere at once. Viga's synthesized voice, usually a calm presence in his helmet, was silent, perhaps recalibrating after the chaotic transit. He took a step forward, his heavy boot crunching on unseen debris. The sound echoed unnaturally in the fog-choked silence. He scanned the buildings. Stores with faded signs, Norman's grocer, Annie's books, a movie theater, its marquee blank. It looked like a town, a human town. But it felt dead, abandoned, like a corpse forgotten by time. This wasn't hell. This wasn't a UAC facility. Where was he? He began to walk, his shotgun held at the ready, his every sense on high alert. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of an eternal hunter, but the prey was unknown. The rules of this hunting ground were different. The fog swirled around him, seeming to coalesce and retreat with his passage. He heard sounds, faint, indistinct whispers just at the edge of his perception. The distant, sobbing cry of a child, the scrape of metal on concrete. But when he turned his helmet towards the source, there was nothing. Only the shifting, impenetrable gray wall of fog. He found a map board near what looked like a town square, its surface faded and water-damaged. Letters were visible, Silent Hill. Below it, a cheerful slogan, now rendered deeply ironic by the oppressive atmosphere. Come visit our scenic lakeside town. He had a name for this place. It meant nothing to him. His mission parameters, ingrained in his very soul, were simple. Find the demons. Kill the demons. Find the source of the invasion. Destroy it. But here, there were no clear enemies, only a profound, suffocating sense of dread. A feeling that the very air he breathed was poisoned not just with moisture, but with sorrow, with madness, with a deep, foundational wrongness that made the straightforward evil of hell seem almost clean by comparison. He gripped his shotgun tighter. He didn't understand this place, but he knew one thing. There was evil here, a different kind of evil, and he would rip and tear it, just the same. The Slayer moved through the fog-shrouded streets like a ghost of vengeance, his Praetor suit a stark, green anomaly in the gray, decaying world. The silence was the most unnerving part. He was used to the constant roaring cacophony of hell, the screams of the damned, the screeching of demons, the thunder of his own weapons. This silence felt like a held breath, a prelude to something terrible. His motion tracker, usually a reliable indicator of enemy positions, was useless here. It flickered erratically, showing phantom contacts that vanished as soon as he turned towards them. The town itself seemed to be playing tricks on his senses. Then, movement. A shambling figure emerged from the fog ahead. It was vaguely humanoid, but horribly wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its head lolled at an impossible angle, and its skin looked like damp, stretched parchment, barely containing something fluid and diseased beneath. It wore the tattered remnants of clothing, perhaps a hospital gown, and it made a low, wet, gurgling sound, a lying figure. The Slayer's combat protocols, honed over millennia, didn't hesitate. Threat identified. Engage. He raised his combat shotgun. The familiar, comforting weight settled in his hands. He aimed center mass. He fired. Boom! The roar of the shotgun was a brutal physical violation of the town's silence. The blast struck the creature, and the result was wrong. It didn't explode in a satisfying shower of gore and argent energy. It tore. The impact ripped a great ragged hole in its torso. But the substance that sprayed out wasn't just blood. It was a thick, dark, viscous fluid, and the flesh itself seemed to stretch and tear like wet cloth. The creature staggered back, its broken form twitching, still moving, still trying to advance. The Slayer frowned behind his visor. Inefficient. He switched to the super shotgun. The double-barreled harbinger of doom felt better in his grip. He advanced, closing the distance. The creature lunged, its misshapen arms reaching. He fired both barrels at point-blank range. Kaboom! This time, the effect was more pronounced. The sheer, concussive force blew the creature apart. But again, it wasn't clean. Limbs flew off, trailing streamers of dark, stringy tissue. The torso ruptured, spilling glistening, unidentifiable organs onto the cracked asphalt. It was messy, organic, unsettlingly biological. It lacked the satisfying, almost abstract destruction he was used to. He looked down at the twitching remains, his boot resting on the creature's still gurgling head. He stomped. The head popped like a rotten melon, splattering more of the dark fluid onto his greave. Purged, but not satisfying, he heard more movement. Skittering sounds. Wet, shuffling footsteps approaching from the fog on all sides. He gripped his shotgun, reloading with a practiced flick of his wrist. They emerged from the gray curtain. More of the lying figures. And something else. Figures in stained, white nurses' uniforms, their faces horribly deformed or entirely absent, replaced by a twitching, cancerous growth. They moved with a jerky, spastic gait, clutching rusted scalpels and pipes. Nurses. They converged on him. Not with the frenzied charge of imps, but with a slow, relentless, and deeply unnerving shuffle. Their silence was worse than any roar. The Slayer went to work. The super shotgun boomed again and again, each blast tearing apart the grotesque figures. He switched to the plasma rifle, the rapid thrum-thrum-thrum of its energy bolts searing through the creatures, cauterizing the wounds even as it blew them apart. He drew his chainsaw, the familiar, angry roar, a comforting sound in this quiet hell. He carved through them, the teeth biting into the strange, yielding flesh. He killed them all. He stood in the center of a small circle of twitching, bleeding, dismembered body parts. The silence returned, heavier than before, broken only by the low growl of his idling chainsaw. He felt no triumph, no release, just a growing sense of unease. These things were weak, pathetic compared to the legions of hell. But they were wrong. They felt wrong. They died wrong. And he had a chilling, unfamiliar thought, a cold sliver of doubt in the furnace of his rage. What if killing them isn't the point? The thought was dismissed as quickly as it arose. Killing was always the point. He revved the chainsaw, the sound a defiant roar against the silence, and moved on, deeper into the fog, deeper into the quiet, waiting nightmare of Silent Hill. After the initial unsettling encounters, the Doomslayer's core objective remained unchanged: find the source of the corruption and destroy it. In Hell, this usually meant finding the biggest concentration of demons, the largest gore nest, the most obvious portal, and punching a hole through it. He applied the same, direct logic here. He needed to get his bearings. He needed a high vantage point. His suit's limited environmental scanner showed a tall structure nearby, a clock tower, according to the faded street signs. That would be his first objective. He began to move with his usual ground-eating stride, his heavy boots pounding on the asphalt. He navigated by instinct, his internal compass locking onto the vague direction of the tower. He passed down empty streets, past deserted cars coated in rust and grime, past playgrounds where the swings moved gently in a non-existent breeze. The fog was a constant, oppressive presence, but it seemed different now. It felt thicker in some directions, thinner in others, as if subtly guiding him, or perhaps hindering him. He turned a corner onto what should have been Toluca Avenue, the main street leading to the town center. He recognized the dilapidated storefronts. He walked for several blocks, the clock tower seeming no closer. He turned another corner. He was back on Toluca Avenue. The same storefronts, the same broken traffic light swinging overhead. He stopped. His internal chronometer showed he had been walking for 15 minutes. His suit's inertial navigator confirmed he had been moving in a straight line. Yet he was back where he started. He frowned behind his visor. An illusion? A spatial distortion? He had encountered such tricks before, usually the work of summoners or other warp-based entities. He tried again. This time, he focused his senses, pushing past the fog, looking for any sign of psychic manipulation, any telltale shimmer of an illusion. He chose a different street, Block Street, heading west. He walked with a determined, relentless pace, his eyes scanning every detail, memorizing the patterns of decay on the buildings. He walked for 20 minutes. The fog swirled. He turned a corner. He was back on Block Street, facing the same direction he had been walking, the same graffiti-scarred wall to his left. Analysis, his voice, unheard by anyone but himself and the dormant AI in his suit, was a low growl of frustration. Viga's voice flickered to life in his ear, still strained, still processing the alien environment. Spatial geometry inconsistent with Euclidean norms. Local reality appears unstable. Multiple temporal and dimensional fluctuations detected. Navigation impossible under current conditions. Impossible. The Slayer did not understand impossible. He understood obstacles, and obstacles were meant to be destroyed. He looked at the building beside him, the one he had just passed minutes ago. If he could not go around it, he would go through it. He raised his fist, the reinforced knuckles of the Praetor suit gleaming. He punched the brick wall. The impact was thunderous. Bricks shattered, mortar exploded outwards. He punched again and again. He was not just breaking the wall, he was pulverizing it. Within seconds, he had smashed a hole large enough to walk through. He stepped inside. It was a dark, abandoned diner. Booths were overturned, plates lay shattered on the floor, a thick layer of dust and grime coated everything. He walked through the diner, towards the back wall. He punched his way through that wall too, emerging into a dark, narrow alleyway. He had bypassed the loop. He had imposed his will on the town's shifting geometry. He felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. He turned, expecting to see the next street, the path forward. He was standing back on Block Street, right where he had started. The holes he had punched in the diner wall were gone. The building was whole, pristine in its decay. A new feeling, one utterly alien to the Doomslayer, began to coil in his gut. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was a profound, unsettling sense of futility. His strength, his power, his direct, unstoppable approach, it was meaningless here. He could shatter walls, but the town simply rebuilt them. He could run in a straight line, but the town simply bent the line back on itself. This wasn't hell, where the rules were brutal but consistent. This wasn't a fortress to be breached, or a demon to be killed. This was a cage made of fog, silence, and his own mounting frustration. And for the first time in his eternal war, the Doomslayer had encountered an enemy he couldn't simply punch his way through. The town of Silent Hill was not merely a location, it was a consciousness, a slumbering, parasitic entity that fed on the suffering and guilt of those drawn into its misty embrace. It had slept, fitfully, since its last visitor, dreaming its nightmares of rust and blood. The Slayer's arrival was not a gentle awakening, it was a psychic detonation. The sheer, overwhelming force of his rage, the incandescent, eternal fury that defined his very being, was a stimulus unlike any the town had ever experienced. It was not the familiar, subtle notes of human guilt, fear, or repressed desire. It was a pure, focused, and utterly uncompromising hatred, a hatred directed not inward, but outward, at a specific, external enemy, the demonic. The town recoiled from the initial blast of his presence. This was not a broken soul seeking judgment or solace. This was a force of judgment itself, an executioner who had stumbled into the wrong courtroom. But as the initial shock subsided, the town's ancient, insidious intelligence began to stir. It tasted his rage, yes, but beneath the surface, beneath the meter's-thick armor of pure, violent intent, it sensed something else. It sensed the bedrock upon which that rage was built. It sensed loss, a profound, world-shattering loss. It sensed betrayal, a deep, festering wound left by trusted allies. It sensed guilt, a tiny, almost imperceptible, but infinitely deep seed of guilt, buried beneath a mountain of righteous fury. The guilt of a protector who had failed. These were the notes the town understood. These were the hooks upon which it could hang its nightmares. The fog, which had been a passive, obscuring presence, began to change. It was no longer just fog. It became a medium, a canvas upon which the town could begin to paint its masterpiece of psychological horror, tailored specifically for its newest, most powerful, and most resistant visitor. The whispers in the fog became clearer, more specific. They were no longer indistinct murmurs. They were the voices of the dead. Why did you leave us? A voice, cold and metallic, like that of a night sentinel. Asterisk, the priests, they promised power. You were weak. Asterisk, asterisk, Argent Denur, fallen, because of you. Asterisk, the Slayer gripped his shotgun, his knuckles white. Lies, demonic lies. He knew the truth. He had been betrayed. He was not responsible, but the voices were insidious. They did not just accuse. They mourned. Asterisk, my son, gone. Asterisk, a woman's voice, choked with tears. A voice he hadn't heard in millennia, the voice of a mother whose child he had failed to protect in the first hell invasion on Earth. Asterisk, Daisy. Asterisk, a child's whisper, simple, heartbroken. He roared, a guttural, primal sound of fury, and fired his shotgun into the fog, blasting the whispers into momentary silence. But they returned, always at the edge of his hearing, relentless, unavoidable. The very air began to change. The faint, metallic scent of old blood grew stronger, thicker. The ground under his feet felt softer, spongier. He looked down. The cracked asphalt was darkening, becoming a deep, visceral red. It looked less like a road and more like exposed, raw tissue. The buildings around him began to shift, their familiar, decaying forms subtly altering. Windows became weeping sores. Doorways became gaping, toothless mouths. The architecture of the town was beginning to reflect not just its own inherent darkness, but the specific, blood-soaked history of its newest inhabitant. Silent Hill had found its focus. It had tasted the Slayer's pain. And now, it was beginning to build his personal hell, brick by bloody brick, memory by agonizing memory. The true nightmare was about to begin. The transformation of Silent Hill was insidious, a slow bleed-through of the Slayer's own tormented past into the town's malleable reality. The generic decay was being replaced by a specific, targeted form of rot. He found himself walking through streets that felt hauntingly familiar, yet horribly wrong. The architecture began to shift. The simple, wooden buildings taking on the stark, brutalist lines of Sentinel Prime, the ancient city of his people on Argent Denur. But it was a corrupted version. The proud banners were tattered and stained with gore. The gleaming metal was rusted and weeping a dark, oily substance. The noble statues of Sentinel kings were broken, defiled, their faces contorted in silent screams. The fog remained, but now it carried not just whispers, but the faint, clangorous echo of battle, the clash of energy swords, the roar of plasma fire, the dying screams of his brothers in arms. Sounds from a war lost millennia ago, now given a ghostly half-life in this fog-bound purgatory. And then he saw them. Figures emerged from the mist. At first, they were just silhouettes, tall and proud, clad in armor that echoed the design of his own praetor suit. Night sentinels, his comrades, his kin. He stopped, his shotgun held low. A flicker of something ancient, something long buried beneath the rage, stirred within him. Recognition. Hope. But as they drew closer, the illusion shattered. Their armor was broken, rent, fused with grotesque, pulsating demonic flesh. Their movements were slow, shambling, like puppets cut from their strings. Their faces, visible through shattered visors, were masks of agony and accusation. Their eyes glowed with a dull, hateful red light. "You left us," one of them moaned, its voice a distorted echo of a comrade he had seen fall during the betrayer's final stand. "You abandoned Argent Denur to the deceiver. The priests offered salvation," another hissed, its form a hideous mockery of a sentinel warrior fused with the cybernetics of a hell priest. "They offered power. You offered only destruction. You broke your vows, Slayer," a third accused, its voice the cold, metallic tone of Commander Valen, the betrayer himself, before his fall. "You failed your king. You failed your people. You failed us." They did not attack him. They simply stood there, surrounding him, a silent, spectral circle of judgment. They were not demons in the way he understood them. They were memories given flesh. They were his own guilt, his own buried sense of failure, given form and voice by the insidious power of the town. He knew they were not real. He knew this was a trick, a psychic assault designed to break his will. But the pain they inflicted was real. The ancient wound of Argent Denur's fall, a wound he had cauterized with pure, unrelenting rage, was being torn open. He raised his shotgun. His hands, usually rock-steady, trembled almost imperceptibly. "You are not them," he growled, the words a low, guttural denial. "We are what you made us," the corrupted Valen figure whispered. "We are the price of your crusade." He fired. The shotgun blast tore through the nearest figure, ripping apart the mockery of sentinel armor and the pulsating flesh beneath. But the effect was wrong. There was no explosion of argent energy, only a wet, tearing sound, and a shower of dark, viscous fluid. The figure collapsed, twitching, its hateful red eyes still fixed on him. He fired again, and again, blasting the spectral figures apart. But more emerged from the fog, an endless legion of his own failures, his own guilt, marching towards him in a slow, silent, and utterly damning parade. He was trapped in a nightmare woven from his own history. He could kill the manifestations, but he could not kill the memory. And the town, feeding on his rising frustration and the resurfacing pain, only grew stronger, its grip on his soul tightening, just as the Slayer felt the first. Cold tendrils of genuine despair begin to touch his rage-fueled heart. A new sound cut through the moaning accusations of the corrupted sentinels. It was a high, piercing, and utterly alien wail. An air raid siren. The sound seemed to tear through the very fabric of the world. The gray, fog-choked sky turned a deep, bloody crimson. The ground beneath his feet shifted, the cracked asphalt dissolving, replaced by rusted metal grating. The corrupted sentinel figures around him did not vanish, but their forms seemed to stretch and distort, their moans becoming part of a larger industrial scream. He was no longer in the decaying, sentinel-themed streets. He was somewhere else, somewhere worse. The other world. He found himself in a labyrinth of rusted metal, exposed pipes leaking noxious steam, and great grinding machinery that seemed to serve no logical purpose. Barbed wire snaked across the walls. Chains hung from the ceiling, ending in cruel, meat-hook-like implements. The air was thick with the smell of rust, decay, and cooked meat. It felt familiar, sickeningly so. It echoed the industrial hellscapes of the UAC facilities he had purged, the gore factories of hell itself. But this was different. This was not a place of simple, industrial slaughter. This was a place of deliberate, psychological torture. The machinery seemed designed to inflict pain. Great pistons slammed down onto blood-stained platforms. Conveyor belts carried unidentifiable chunks of flesh towards grinding gears. The very architecture was hostile, twisted into forms that spoke of suffering, of violation, of bodies broken and remade into objects of torment. He saw symbols scrawled on the walls in blood and rust. Not the familiar runes of hell, but strange arcane symbols, intricate and disturbing. He saw depictions of grotesque, monstrous figures, things with pyramid-shaped helmets, things that were all mouths and legs. This was not his hell. This was someone else's, someone deeply, profoundly, and intimately broken. And the creatures here were different too. The spectral sentinels were gone. Now new horrors emerged from the shadows and the steam. Twisted, vaguely feminine figures, their bodies wrapped in bloody bandages, their movements convulsive, almost sexual in their unnaturalness. They carried lead pipes and scalpels, their attacks jerky and unpredictable. The nurses, hideous, dog-like creatures, their skin peeled back to reveal raw, bloody muscle, their heads split vertically into a gaping maw. Split heads, things that looked like mannequins, fused together in obscene configurations, scuttling across the floor on broken plastic legs. They were creatures born not of fire and brimstone, but of psychosis, of repressed desire, of guilt made flesh. The Slayer reacted as he always did. He met the horror with overwhelming violence. His shotgun boomed in the enclosed metallic spaces, the sound deafening. His chainsaw roared, tearing through the strange, yielding flesh of the nurses. His plasma rifle spat blue energy, melting the plastic bodies of the mannequin creatures. He killed them. He purged them. But the feeling of wrongness intensified. These creatures did not fight with the fury of demons. They fought with a kind of desperate, pathetic neediness. Their attacks felt less like assaults and more like grotesque, suicidal pleas for attention. He was not fighting soldiers. He was fighting symptoms. Symptoms of a disease that seemed to permeate the very metal and rust of this nightmare world. He pushed onward, deeper into the industrial labyrinth, searching for the source, for the heart of this new, twisted hell. The siren wailed again, its call echoing through the metallic corridors, a promise of more horror, more madness, more glimpses into a darkness that was, for the first time, utterly, terrifyingly incomprehensible to him. He found the room deep within the rusted heart of the otherworld labyrinth. It was not a control room or a summoning chamber. It was a child's bedroom, or rather, a horrifying, industrial mockery of one. The walls were weeping rust, the floor slick with a dark, oily substance. In the center of the room stood a small, metal-framed bed, its mattress stained and torn. On the bed there were no blankets, only a scattering of rusted tools, hammers, wrenches, scalpels. And sitting on the edge of the bed, its back to him, was a small figure. It looked like a child, frail and small, wearing a simple, dirty white gown. It was humming a tune, a simple, discordant lullaby that made the Slayer's teeth ache. He stopped in the doorway, his shotgun held low. His combat senses screamed at him. This was wrong. This was dangerous. But it was not the familiar danger of a charging demon. This was a different kind of danger. A danger to the soul. The figure slowly turned. And the Slayer's mind, a fortress that had withstood the psychic assaults of gods and demons, momentarily faltered. It was not a child. It was a thing. Its body was small, yes, but its limbs were too long, its fingers ending in sharp metallic claws. Its face, Its face was a smooth, pale, and utterly featureless mask, except for two large black weeping eyes that seemed to drink the light from the room, and from its back, two long, floppy, blood-stained ears, like those of a rabbit. It held something in its lap, a small, crudely made doll, also shaped like a rabbit, its button eyes missing. The creature looked at him, and it spoke. Its voice was a child's voice, small and filled with a terrible, heart-wrenching sorrow. "Daisy," it whispered. The Slayer froze. The name. That name. A name he had buried beneath millennia of rage and slaughter. Daisy, his pet rabbit. The only innocent thing in his life before the fall. Killed by the demons in their first cruel invasion. The catalyst, the beginning of his eternal war. The creature on the bed tilted its head, its weeping eyes fixed on him. "Hurts," it whispered. "They hurt, Daisy. Why didn't you stop them? Why weren't you there?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, heartbreaking question. The question he had never allowed himself to ask. The guilt he had drowned in an ocean of righteous fury. The creature slowly stood up. It was small, barely reaching his waist. It began to walk towards him, its movements jerky and unnatural, its metallic claws scraping on the floor. It held out the broken rabbit doll. "Fix it," it pleaded, its voice cracking. "Make it stop hurting." The Slayer stood his ground, his shotgun held forgotten at his side. He was facing the source of his rage, the original wound, given grotesque, pitiable form. He could kill it. A single blast from his shotgun would obliterate the small, fragile creature. It was a monster, a manifestation, a trick of this hellish place. But he hesitated. For the first time in centuries, he hesitated. To kill it would be to kill the memory of Daisy all over again. To kill it would be to admit that the pain, the guilt, was still there, buried beneath the armor and the rage. The creature reached him. It looked up at his impassive green visor, its black eyes leaking a thick, dark fluid like tears of oil. It reached out a small, clawed hand and touched his armored leg. "Why?" it whispered again. He couldn't do it. He knelt. A giant of green armor, a being who had slaughtered billions of demons, knelt before the small, weeping embodiment of his own, long-buried grief. He did not speak. He did not reach out. He simply knelt, a silent, agonizing acknowledgement of the pain he could not purge, the guilt he could not escape. The creature looked at him, and for a moment, its form seemed to flicker. The claws retracted, the featureless face softened. The weeping eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something other than sorrow. Recognition? Forgiveness? Then, the moment broke. The creature let out a sudden, piercing shriek, its form distorting, becoming more monstrous, more spider-like. It lunged, its claws aiming for his visor. Instinct took over. He reacted without thought. His fist shot out. A single, brutal blow that struck the small creature in the chest. It flew backwards, hitting the metal bed frame with a sickening crunch. It lay still, broken, the rabbit doll falling from its lifeless claws. Silence returned to the room. He had killed it. He had killed Daisy again. He rose slowly, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He turned and walked from the room, leaving the broken form on the bed. He had faced his guilt, and he had destroyed it. But the victory felt like ash in his mouth. The town had found his weakness, and it had just begun to exploit it. He left the child's room, the industrial nightmare of the other world pressing in on him once more. He moved through the rusted corridors, his mind a cold, silent echo chamber. The encounter with the Daisy creature had shaken him, not with fear, but with a profound, unwelcome sense of weariness. His rage, the fuel that had powered his eternal crusade, felt banked, muted. He needed to kill. He needed the familiar, cleansing release of demonic slaughter to purge the unsettling residue of that encounter. He burst through a set of rusted double doors into what looked like a large, industrial boiler room. Pipes lined the walls, venting clouds of scalding steam. Great, furnace-like structures dominated the center of the room, their fires casting a hellish, orange glow. And demons, The room was filled with them. Imps skittered across the catwalks above. Possessed workers shambled from the shadows. And in the center, near the largest furnace, stood a hulking, cybernetically enhanced mancubus, its arm cannons already warming up. The Slayer's rage surged back, a welcome, familiar fire. He roared, a guttural challenge, and charged, his shotgun booming. The battle was a whirlwind of familiar violence. He carved a path through the lesser demons, his movements fluid, brutal, efficient. He dodged the mancubus's fireballs, using the pipes and machinery for cover. He was back in his element. This was a language he understood. It was in the midst of this chaotic ballet of death that he saw her, huddled behind a stack of rusted barrels, a small, trembling figure. A young woman, perhaps in her late teens, with short, dark hair and eyes wide with absolute terror. She wore simple modern clothes, jeans and a hoodie that looked utterly out of place in the industrial nightmare around them. She clutched a lead pipe like a lifeline, her knuckles white. She was clearly not part of this world. She was like him, an outsider, trapped. He registered her presence, catalogued her as a non-combatant, and dismissed her. His focus was on the demons, but the mancubus saw her too, its single, malevolent eye fixed on the easier, softer target. It swiveled its massive cannons and fired a volley of fireballs directly at her hiding place. The Slayer reacted purely on instinct, the same instinct that had made him charge hell itself. Protect the innocent. He moved with a speed that defied his bulk. He launched himself through the air, intercepting the fireballs with his own armored body. They exploded against his praetor suit, the heat washing over him, staggering him, but doing no real harm. He landed in a crouch directly in front of the young woman, a solid green wall between her and the demon. He turned, raised his plasma rifle, and unloaded the entire clip into the mancubus's face, the blue energy melting its cybernetic eye and boiling its brain. The great beast collapsed, dead. He stood, breathing heavily, and turned to look at the young woman. She was staring up at him, her face pale, her eyes filled not with gratitude, but with an even deeper, more profound terror. To her, he was not a savior. He was just another monster. A bigger, louder, more violent monster than the ones he had just killed. He was part of the nightmare, not the escape from it. She scrambled backwards, crab-walking away from him, her eyes never leaving his impassive visor. "Stay back," she whimpered. "Don't hurt me." The Slayer paused. He had faced down the legions of hell. He had killed gods. But the simple, human terror in this young woman's eyes, it was a weapon he had no defense against. He lowered his plasma rifle. He took a half-step back, a gesture he hadn't made in centuries, a gesture that felt alien and awkward. He was trying to show her he wasn't a threat, but in this world, in Silent Hill, everything was a threat. The boiler room began to change. The air grew colder. The fires in the furnaces flickered and died. A thick, icy fog began to pour in through the vents, carrying with it the faint, haunting sound of static. The young woman screamed. "No, not again. Leave me alone." She scrambled to her feet and fled, disappearing into the swirling fog and darkness, leaving the Slayer alone once more. He stood in the now silent, fog-filled boiler room. He had saved her life, and she had run from him as if he were the devil himself. He did not understand. He did not understand this place. He did not understand its rules. He only understood the mission. Find the evil. Kill the evil. He turned and strode into the fog, leaving the dead mancubus and the lingering echo of human fear behind him. His path was clear, his purpose was simple. But for the first time, a sliver of doubt, a question of whether his simple purpose was enough in this complex, psychological hell, began to form in the deepest, most fortified corners of his soul. Driven by an instinct he couldn't name, a pull towards a nexus of suffering and decay, the Slayer found himself outside the looming Gothic structure of Alchemilla Hospital. Its windows were dark, like vacant eyes, and the air around it felt heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic, old blood, and a deep, institutional despair. Hospitals in his own world were places of healing. This felt like a place where hope went to die. He pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped inside. The interior was a nightmare of peeling paint, overturned gurneys, and flickering fluorescent lights. A profound silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of some unseen leak. His combat senses immediately registered threats, multiple life signs, but they were wrong. Erratic heartbeats, unnatural movements. They emerged from the shadowed rooms and corridors. The nurses, dozens of them, their movements were even more jerky and disturbing in the close confines of the hospital, their faceless heads twitching, their rusted scalpels held like religious icons. He raised his chain gun, the multi-barreled weapon spinning to life with a satisfying, angry whine. He opened fire. The corridors erupted in a storm of high-velocity shells and flying gore. The nurses were fragile, their bodies easily torn apart by the onslaught. But their numbers were seemingly endless. They poured from every doorway, a tide of twitching, silent, bandaged flesh. He fought his way deeper into the hospital, clearing corridors and wards with brutal efficiency. But the further he went, the stranger the corruption became. He began to see things that were not just the familiar, organic horror of Silent Hill. He saw UAC logos, half peeled from the walls, smeared with blood. He saw computer terminals, their screens displaying corrupted data logs that spoke of Argent experiments and stabilizing the Lazarus waves. And the enemies began to change. He still fought nurses, but now he also encountered figures that were a hideous fusion of UAC personnel and demonic influence. Possessed scientists, their bodies twisted and augmented with crude cybernetics, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light, shambled towards him, firing corrupted plasma pistols. He saw things that looked like the UAC's own security drones, but fused with flesh and bone, their robotic limbs ending in dripping, organic claws. It was as if the town was drawing not just on his own, personal guilt, but on the sins of his origin, the sins of the UAC, the sins of Samuel Hayden, the original sin of Argent Energy. He found a surgical theater. The operating table was covered in blood and strange, arcane symbols, and strapped to the table was a figure that made his blood run cold. It looked like a UAC scientist, but his body had been brutally vivisected, his organs replaced with humming, Argent-powered machinery. Wires snaked from his skull, connected to a monitor that displayed fluctuating energy readings and the single repeated word, Lear, Hayden. The town was showing him Hayden. Not the cool, calculating cyborg, but the desperate, ambitious man beneath, the man who had made a deal with devils for the sake of progress. His justifications are illogical. Viga's voice suddenly stated in his helmet, the AI's tone flat but carrying an undercurrent of something akin to revulsion. The potential energy gain did not outweigh the certainty of dimensional breach. His models were flawed, driven by ambition. The Slayer stared at the horrific tableau. He felt a surge of his familiar, righteous fury. Hayden's betrayal, his hubris, had cost countless lives. It had fueled Hell's invasion. He raised his fist to smash the corrupted monitor, to obliterate this symbol of Hayden's sin. But he paused. This wasn't Hayden. This was just a reflection, a puppet show put on by the town. And the town was feeding on his anger. It was using his own righteous fury against Hayden to draw him deeper into its nightmare. He lowered his fist. He would not play its game. He turned his back on the surgical theater, on the manifestation of Hayden's sin, and continued his search. He was looking for the heart of this place, the source of its power, and he had a growing suspicion that it was not just the demons he had to fight, but the very ideas, the very memories that this town used as its weapons. As the Slayer descended deeper into the bowels of Alchemilla Hospital, the fabric of reality grew thinner, more unstable. Corridors twisted at impossible angles. Rooms appeared and disappeared. Gravity itself seemed to fluctuate, making his movements feel heavy and sluggish one moment, unnaturally light the next. The constant, low-level static that had been interfering with his suit's systems intensified, punctuated by bursts of white noise and faint, distorted whispers. Environmental analysis inconclusive, Vega reported. Its usually calm, synthesized voice showing the first hints of digital strain. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating abnormally. Localized temporal distortions detected. Recommend caution. The Slayer ignored the recommendation. Caution was not in his vocabulary. He pushed onward, his shotgun blasting apart the grotesque manifestations that lurked in the shifting shadows. He entered a large, circular chamber that seemed to be a central morgue. Rows of refrigerated body lockers lined the walls, many of them hanging open, empty. In the center of the room, however, was something far worse. A great, pulsating mass of raw, undifferentiated flesh, fused with rusted metal and embedded computer terminals. It seemed to be growing, consuming the very structure of the room, and it radiated an aura of profound psychic agony. Entity analysis, the Slayer growled. Vega was silent for a long moment, the hum of its processing cores audible in the Slayer's helmet. Analysis, impossible, the AI finally stated, the words clipped, almost panicked. The entity exhibits biological, mechanical, and extra-dimensional properties. It appears to be a localized nexus of spatial and biological instability. Its energy signature is paradoxical. It violates known laws of thermodynamics. This was new. Vega, the hyper-intelligent AI that had helped him navigate the complexities of UAC facilities and even the chaotic logic of hell, was stumped. The phenomena of Silent Hill were simply outside its operational parameters. It was encountering a reality based not on physics, but on psychology. Not on energy, but on symbolism. Threat level assessment? The Slayer demanded. Threat level. Indeterminate, Vega replied, the admission of failure hanging heavy in the digital air. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal and orbital bombardment. A pause. Correction. Orbital assets are unavailable. Recommend. Proceeding with extreme prejudice? Even the AI's tactical recommendations were breaking down. The pulsating mass in the center of the room seemed to sense their confusion. It shuddered, and a low, multi-voiced moan emanated from it, a sound of 1,000 tortured souls crying out at once. Tendrils of flesh and rusted metal began to lash out, smashing against the walls, tearing open more body lockers. The Slayer raised his BFG. This was a language he understood. If logic failed, overwhelming force was the answer. But as he prepared to fire, the monitors embedded in the fleshy mass flickered to life. They did not show data, they showed images. Images from his past. He saw himself, younger, a Marine on Mars City, fighting the first demonic outbreak. He saw his comrades fall. He saw his own, brutal, desperate actions. He saw the trial, the court-martial, the exile. He saw Argent Denur, glorious and bright, before its fall. He saw King Novik. He saw the Night Sentinels. He saw the moment of the betrayer's choice. He saw Daisy. The images were corrupted, distorted, overlaid with the iconography of Silent Hill. Barbed wire, rust, suffering. It was the town, using the AI's link to his own suit's memory banks, weaponizing his own history against him. Data corruption detected, Vega stated, its voice now laced with genuine alarm. Firewall integrity failing. External psychic intrusion attempt. Successful. Core logic compromised. Recommend. Vega's voice dissolved into a burst of static and white noise, and then fell silent. The Slayer stood alone in the chamber, the pulsating mass before him now displaying a single, mocking image on all its screens. The terrified, pixelated face of Dr. Samuel Hayden. He was cut off. His one source of logical analysis, his connection to the world of reason, was gone, consumed by the madness of Silent Hill. He was truly, utterly alone, armed only with his rage and his weapons, in a world that defied all logic, all reason, all hope, and the town, sensing his isolation, prepared to unleash its final, most personal judgment upon him. The silence left by Vega's departure was profound. For the first time, the Slayer was truly alone in his helmet, the comforting, logical hum of the AI replaced by a vast, echoing emptiness. The pulsating, fleshy mass in the center of the morgue shuddered and went dark, its purpose fulfilled. It had severed his connection to reason. A new sound began to fill the chamber. Not the screeching of demons or the moaning of the damned. It was a slow, heavy, rhythmic thud, 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 like a giant's heartbeat or the fall of a colossal hammer. The air grew cold, colder than the refrigerated lockers. A new fog rolled into the chamber, thicker and darker than the mist outside, carrying the scent not of blood, but of old, cold iron and ozone. From the swirling darkness at the far end of the morgue, a figure emerged. It was immense, easily 10 feet tall, its form both hauntingly familiar and terrifyingly alien. It resembled a Knight Sentinel Praetor, the elite guardians of Argent d'Honneur. Its armor was of a similar design, archaic and regal, but it was corrupted. The gleaming silver was replaced by pitted, weeping rust. The noble iconography was twisted into symbols of pain and betrayal. Barbed wire was wrapped around its limbs, cutting into the metal. Its weapon was not a sentinel energy spear. It was a colossal axe, easily 12 feet long, its head shaped like a cruel executioner's blade, forged from the same rusted, weeping metal as its armor. The axe radiated a palpable aura of cold, focused judgment, and its head was encased in a helmet, not the sleek, functional helmet of a sentinel, but a heavy, crudely welded pyramid of rusted iron, completely featureless except for a single, horizontal slit from which no light emerged. It was not Pyramid Head. It was something new, something forged specifically for him, a manifestation of his own history, his own failures, his own sins. It was the Judge of Argent. The judge did not roar. It did not speak. It simply began to walk towards him, its heavy, metallic footfalls the source of the rhythmic thudding. Each step was deliberate, inexorable, the gait of an executioner approaching the block. It radiated an aura not of simple malice, but of cold, absolute, and utterly impersonal judgment. The slayer raised his chaingun, the barrel spinning to life. He opened fire. A torrent of high-velocity shells slammed into the judge's rusted armor. Sparks flew, metal screamed, but the figure did not even slow down. The bullets that would have torn apart a Hell Knight simply ricocheted off its corrupted plate. He switched to the rocket launcher. 3 rockets, fired in quick succession, exploded against the judge's chest. The figure was momentarily wreathed in fire and smoke, but when it cleared, it was still advancing. Its armor scorched but unbroken. This was no mere demon. This was something else. Something invulnerable. The judge reached him. The great argent axe rose, impossibly high, and then descended with the speed and force of a falling star. The slayer dodged, the movement pure instinct. The axe slammed into the metal floor where he had stood, the impact tearing a great, gaping hole in the reinforced plasteel, sending sparks showering into the air. The sheer physical power was immense. The slayer counterattacked. He fired his super shotgun point blank into the judge's side. The blast tore away a chunk of rusted armor, revealing nothing. Only more rust, more weeping metal beneath. There was no flesh, no blood, no vulnerable point. He drew his chainsaw and lunged, aiming for the judge's legs. The spinning teeth met the rusted metal, and the chainsaw screamed in protest, its adamantine teeth barely scratching the surface before being thrown back. The judge swung its axe again, a wide, horizontal sweep. The slayer was forced to leap back, the wind from the passing blade buffeting him. This was impossible. His weapons, tools forged to kill gods and demons, were having no effect. He was fighting a concept, an idea, given physical form. He was fighting his own judgment. The battle against the Judge of Argent was unlike any the Doomslayer had ever fought. It was a grinding, frustrating, and deeply unsettling affair. He was faster. He was more agile, but he could not harm his opponent. He unloaded his entire arsenal. Rockets exploded harmlessly against the rusted plate. Plasma bolts dissipated against an unseen field. Even the BFG, when fired, seemed to simply pass through the judge, the green orb of energy causing the figure to flicker for a moment before re-solidifying, unharmed. The judge, in turn, was relentless. Its attacks were slow, deliberate, but devastatingly powerful. Each swing of the great argent axe was a potential killing blow, forcing the slayer into a constant, desperate dance of evasion. The axe shattered pillars, tore through metal walls, and shook the very foundations of the hospital morgue. The environment itself was becoming the weapon. The slayer began to realize the horrifying truth. This creature was not a physical being in the way he understood it. It was a manifestation, a symbol. It was the embodiment of the town's judgment upon him, forged from his own guilt over the fall of Argent Denur and the betrayal of his sentinel brothers. It was his past, given form and sent to execute him, and you could not kill the past with a shotgun. He tried a different tactic. He stopped attacking its body and focused on its weapon. He darted in, parrying a downward swing with his doom blade, the energized edge scraping against the rusted axe haft. He tried to disarm it, using his speed and leverage. The judge simply ignored him. It raised its axe, Slayer still clinging to the haft, and slammed the weapon, and him, into the floor. The Slayer felt his armor groan under the impact, warning runes flashing on his HUD. He was losing, not because he was being overpowered, but because he was facing an enemy that operated on entirely different principles. An enemy that could not be killed, only endured. Frustration, an emotion the Slayer rarely felt. His rage usually burned too hot for such subtleties. He began to build. It coalesced into a cold, hard knot in his gut. He was the Doom Slayer. He did not endure. He ended. If this creature could not be killed, then perhaps its source could. The town. This whole, damned nightmare reality. He broke away from the judge, putting distance between them. He looked not at the creature, but at the room around him. At the weeping, rusted walls. At the pulsating, fleshy growths that had begun to sprout from the floor. At the very fabric of this psychological hell. He raised his BFG 9000. He charged it, the green energy building to a critical mass. The judge continued its slow, inexorable advance towards him, its axe held high. He did not fire at the judge. He fired at the room. The BFG discharged. The great, green orb of argent energy did not just hit a wall. It detonated in the very center of the chamber, a miniature sun of pure, destructive power. The effect was not just physical. It was metaphysical. The BFG was a weapon that fired pure, weaponized argent energy, the very substance that fueled both heaven and hell in his own dimension. Here, in Silent Hill, a reality woven from thought and emotion, the blast was a direct assault on the town's consciousness. The room screamed, not a physical sound, but a psychic shriek of pure, agonizing violation. The rusted walls buckled and tore. The fleshy growths exploded. The very fabric of the otherworld flickered violently, like a failing television screen, switching rapidly between the rusted hellscape, the foggy real world, and brief, terrifying flashes of something else entirely, a swirling, chaotic void. The judge of Argent faltered. Its form flickered, became translucent. Its advance momentarily halted as the reality that sustained it was torn apart. The Slayer saw his chance. It wasn't dead, but it was disrupted, vulnerable. He didn't fire again. He charged. He drew the crucible, the great red energy sword of the Sentinels. Its blade hummed with a pure, righteous power, a power that was anathema not just to demons, but perhaps to all forms of spiritual corruption. He lunged, plunging the crucible deep into the judge's flickering, insubstantial chest. The effect was immediate and final. The crucible's energy met the corrupted essence of the manifestation. There was a silent, implosive flash of red and rust-colored light, and the judge of Argent was gone, not broken, not banished, erased. The Slayer stood alone in the now flickering, unstable chamber, the crucible blade smoking in his hand. He had found a way. He couldn't kill the nightmare, but he could wound it. He could fight back not just against its creations, but against the Creator itself. He had just declared war on Silent Hill. The destruction of the Judge of Argent was a turning point. The Slayer had discovered a vulnerability, not in the monsters, but in the monster maker. The town itself, the very fabric of this nightmare reality, could be hurt. It could be broken. And the Doomslayer was very, very good at breaking things. His rage, which had been muted by confusion and frustration, returned with a vengeance. But it was different now. It was colder, more focused. It was not just the rage against demons. It was a rage against this place, against its insidious, psychological torment, against its very existence. He would not play its game of guilt and memory. He would play his own game. The game of ripping and tearing. He began his rampage. He was no longer just moving through Silent Hill. He was attacking it. He strode out of the flickering ruin of the hospital morgue and back into the other world's rusted, industrial hellscape. But now, he was not just killing the creatures he encountered. He was dismantling their environment. He used his rocket launcher not just on demons, but on the great, grinding machines, blasting them into scrap metal. He used his plasma rifle to melt the barbed wire fences, to sever the hanging chains. He used his fists to punch holes in the weeping, rusted walls. He was a force of pure, cathartic destruction, imposing his own reality of physical violence onto the town's reality of psychological horror. And the town screamed. Reality itself began to break down around him. The stable, if horrifying, illusion of the other world started to fracture. Walls would dissolve into fog, then snap back into rusted metal. The ground would shift from grating to asphalt to raw, pulsating flesh under his feet. The sky flickered between crimson, gray, and a swirling, chaotic blackness. The creatures became more desperate, more erratic. Nurses would charge him, only to dissolve into mist before reaching him. Split heads would phase in and out of existence, their attacks becoming unpredictable and glitchy. He was not just killing them. He was crashing their simulation. He found his way back to the surface world, the transition marked by a final, wrenching shriek from the air raid siren that seemed to crackle and die. He stood once more in the foggy, decaying streets. But his assault continued. He saw the looping streets not as a trap, but as an insult. He fired his BFG down Toluca Avenue. The green orb of energy didn't just kill unseen monsters in the fog. It tore a great, gaping hole in the spatial distortion, revealing for a moment the true street beyond. Before reality snapped back like rubber band, he attacked the buildings. He saw the facade of Norman's grocer, and with a roar, he simply ran through it, shattering the brickwork, collapsing the roof, reducing the symbol of mundane reality to rubble. He was waging war on the concept of Silent Hill itself. He was meeting its psychological horror with overwhelming, undeniable, physical annihilation. This was not a battle the town was prepared for. It was designed to break minds, to slowly, insidiously draw its victims into their own personal hells. It was not designed to withstand a direct frontal assault by a being of pure physical force who refused to play by its rules. The fog began to thin in places. The oppressive silence was replaced by the constant, echoing thunder of his weapons and the groaning collapse of the town's architecture. He was not cleansing Silent Hill. He was beating it into submission. He was forcing it to retreat, to recoil from his sheer, overwhelming, and utterly incomprehensible violence. He was the ultimate foreign body, and the town's immune system had failed. Now, he was attacking the disease itself, cutting his way towards its source, leaving a trail of physical and metaphysical destruction in his wake. His destructive path through Silent Hill was not random. It was guided by an instinct, a primal pull towards the heart of his own personal nightmare. The town, in its wounded, flickering state, could no longer maintain its subtle manipulations. It could only lash out, and in doing so, it revealed its core. He found himself drawn towards the outskirts of the town, towards a place that felt both alien and horribly familiar. It was a ruin, but not the simple decay of the town's other buildings. This was a place of violent destruction. Twisted metal girders reached towards the sky like skeletal fingers. Chunks of shattered ferrocrete lay scattered like broken teeth. And the air hummed with a faint, residual energy that he knew. Argent energy. It was a mockery of a UAC facility, but it was also something more. As he stepped into the heart of the ruins, the world shifted one last time. The fog vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of red, hellish energy. The ground was no longer asphalt, but the red sand of Mars. And before him stood not a ruined building, but a twisted, nightmarish fusion of a UAC laboratory and the throne room of Argent Deneur. This was the Nexus, the place where the town had focused all its remaining power, the stage for its final assault on his soul. And in the center of this unholy space stood the final manifestations. It was not a single monster. It was a tableau. He saw himself, younger, clad in his original marine armor, kneeling, his head bowed, his hands covered in blood. Before him stood a hell priest, de Grave, his face a mask of triumphant malice, and at the priest's feet lay a small, broken, white form. Daisy. Beside this scene stood another, Commander Valen the Betrayer, his face a mask of cold, sorrowful duty, offering the argent-powered crucible to the demons in exchange for his lost son. And behind them all, on a throne forged from rusted metal and weeping flesh, sat a figure that was both Samuel Hayden and King Novik, their forms merged into a single, cybernetic, monarchical entity, its eyes glowing with a cold, logical and utterly damning light. It was all for nothing, a chorus of voices whispered, the voices of his fallen sentinel brothers, echoing from the swirling red vortex. Your rage, your crusade, it saved no one. It only destroyed. The Hayden divided by Novik figure raised a hand. The path of perpetual destruction is illogical. It achieves no lasting stability. Only entropy. The betrayer looked at him, his eyes filled with a familiar, weary resignation. Sometimes, Slayer, the price of saving one soul is the damnation of a world. A choice must be made, and the image of his younger self looked up, its face hidden by shadows, but its voice was his own, filled with a raw, primal grief that he had never allowed himself to feel. She's gone, because of me. This was it. The core, the source of his rage, his guilt, his entire, eternal war, laid bare. It was not a monster to be killed. It was a truth to be faced. The town was offering him one final, terrible choice. Acknowledge the pain, or destroy the memory. The tableau of his past stood before him, silent and accusatory. The air was thick with the psychic weight of his own, buried grief and guilt. The town, in its final, desperate gambit, was holding up a mirror to his soul, forcing him to confront the roots of his own eternal rage. He saw the pain in his younger self's posture. He felt the betrayer's agonizing choice. He heard the cold, damning logic of the Hayden divided by Novik fusion, and he looked at the small, broken form of Daisy, the innocent catalyst for millennia of galactic slaughter. For a single, crystallizing moment, the rage faltered. The furnace within him cooled. He saw the cycle, the endless, repeating cycle of violence, of loss leading to rage, rage leading to destruction, destruction leading to more loss. It was the story of his life. It was the story of hell. It was, perhaps, the story of this very town. Could he break it? Could he choose a different path? Could he acknowledge the grief, the pain, without letting it consume him, without turning it into the fuel for more killing? Could he, after all this time, finally begin to heal? The thought was terrifying. It felt like weakness. It felt like surrender. Healing meant stopping. Stopping meant letting the demons win. He looked at the figures before him. They were illusions, manifestations, tricks of a parasitic reality that fed on suffering. They were not real, but the pain they represented was real. He had a choice, a true choice. Perhaps the first one he had faced since he first picked up a weapon. He could lower his crucible. He could face the memory. He could acknowledge the grief that lay beneath the rage. He could, perhaps, begin to understand himself, and in doing so, rob the town of its power over him. Or, he could do what he always did. He could rip and tear, until it was done. He looked at the manifestation of his younger self, kneeling in grief. He looked at the betrayer, trapped in his eternal sorrow. He looked at the cold, logical mockery of Hayden and Novik. Weakness, sentiment, logic without passion. These were the things that had led to the fall of Argent de Nur. These were the things that allowed hell to fester. His rage was not a flaw. It was his strength. It was his purity. It was his purpose. He made his choice. He roared, a sound not of pain, but of pure, absolute, and utterly renewed conviction. He raised the crucible, its red energy blade flaring to life, burning with a heat that seemed to push back the swirling red vortex around them. He charged. He did not charge the Hayden divided by Novik figure. He did not charge the betrayer. He charged himself. He plunged the crucible deep into the heart of the kneeling, grieving manifestation of his younger self. The figure looked up, its face finally revealed. It was his own face, young, human, and filled with a terrible, final understanding. So, it whispered, this is how it ends. Not with peace, only with silence. The manifestation dissolved into red embers, consumed by the crucible's holy fire. The effect on the chamber was immediate. The other figures, the betrayer, Hayden divided by Novik, the hell priest, Daisy, they all screamed as one, their forms flickering, destabilizing their power source, the Slayer's own acknowledged grief severed. The town itself let out a final, psychic shriek of pure, agonizing defeat. It had shown the Slayer his deepest wound, and he had responded by cauterizing it with a blade of pure, unwavering rage. He had not healed. He had simply cut the memory out, choosing oblivion over understanding. The swirling red vortex collapsed. The mockery of the throne room dissolved. Reality itself seemed to tear open, revealing not the foggy streets of Silent Hill, but a swirling, chaotic vortex of green and red energy. A portal, an exit. He had broken the town. He had broken its hold on him, not by solving its riddle but by shattering the board itself. The portal stabilized, a swirling vortex of familiar argent energy. It was a doorway out of this psychological hell, back to the brutal, straightforward reality of his own eternal war. The town of Silent Hill, its power broken, its hold on him shattered, could only watch as he prepared to leave. He stood before the portal, the crucible blade still humming in his hand. He looked back, just once, at the flickering, unstable remains of the nightmare reality he was leaving behind. The fog was returning, trying to reclaim the scarred landscape, trying to heal the wounds he had inflicted upon its very consciousness. He saw no triumph in his victory. He felt no relief. He had faced his own inner demons, his own grief and guilt, and he had chosen to remain the monster. He had chosen rage. He had chosen destruction. He had chosen silence. Perhaps, in his own brutal way, he had become the perfect embodiment of Silent Hill itself, a being trapped in an eternal repeating cycle of violence, forever punishing the world for his own unbearable pain. The thought, if it occurred to him, was dismissed. Such introspection was a weakness. There was only the mission, the eternal war. He turned and strode into the portal. Reality shifted, the cold, damp fog replaced by the familiar, searing heat and sulphurous stench of hell. He was back in his hunting ground. Demons shrieked in the distance, the sounds of battle echoed. Nothing had changed. He deactivated the crucible, slung his shotgun over his shoulder, and began to walk. His silent crusade continued, but something had changed. The experience in Silent Hill, though ultimately rejected, had left a mark, a hairline fracture in the perfect, monolithic structure of his rage. He had seen his grief. He had felt his guilt. He had, for a moment, hesitated. He would continue to rip and tear. He would continue his war until the last demon fell. But the silence in his helmet felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the faint, lingering echo of a child's whisper, the accusing eyes of his fallen brothers, the memory of a choice he had made. He had escaped Silent Hill. But perhaps, in a way he would never truly understand, a small, cold piece of Silent Hill would now, forever, remain trapped within him. His crusade was unending. But his silence was now a little deeper, a little colder, a little more profound. The Slayer walked on, unchanged, yet irrevocably altered, a silent storm of fury forever marching towards an ever-receding horizon of peace.